Welcome to another episode. Let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? And if you enjoy these quiet journeys through history and thought, feel free to subscribe for more. Tonight, we step into the life of a man who seemed to belong to every discipline, and yet to none entirely. A man who painted the most famous smile in history, sketched machines that wouldn't exist for centuries, and dissected the mysteries of the human body with an artist's patience. A man whose curiosity refused to stay inside the lines. Leonardo da Vinci. He was not just an artist, not just an inventor, not just a thinker. He was all of these, and something more elusive, a seeker of connections. Born out of wedlock in a small Tuscan town, he grew into one of the most extraordinary minds the world has ever known. 5 centuries later, we still follow the threads he left behind, in notebooks filled with backwards writing, in paintings that feel almost alive, in ideas that echo into our technologies and our philosophies. This journey isn't to list his achievements as if they were trophies in a case. It's to wander through the corridors of his mind. The questions he asked, the beauty he chased, the unfinished experiments scattered like breadcrumbs across history. To learn from the way he looked at the world, with eyes that never stopped wondering. So settle in, as we move through the landscapes of his life, the dusty streets of Vinci, the bustling workshops of Florence, the courts of Milan. Let's listen to the story of a man who believed everything was connected, because maybe, as we follow him, we'll start to see the connections too. If you're ready, let's begin. Leonardo was born on April 15th, 1452, in a small town called Vinci, nestled in the rolling hills of Tuscany. It wasn't the birthplace of a nobleman or a scholar, but of an illegitimate child, the son of a notary, Ser Piero da Vinci, and a peasant woman, Caterina. In the strict hierarchies of Renaissance Italy, this status might have limited him, but for Leonardo, it may have been a kind of freedom. He wasn't bound to the same expectations as a legitimate heir. His world was open, and he had the rare chance to roam it. As a child, he was curious to the point of mischief. Giorgio Vasari, one of his early biographers, wrote that Leonardo's curiosity was so intense that it seemed he never rested. He would wander through fields observing the way water twisted around rocks, the patterns on leaves, the way birds took flight. Imagine a young boy sketching dragonflies instead of doing chores. That was Leonardo. He didn't receive a formal education in Greek or Latin, the intellectual currency of the Renaissance elite. In fact, later in life he often called himself Homo senza lettere, a man without letters. Yet this so-called disadvantage gave him something rare, a mind unshaped by the rigid teachings of the time. Instead of copying what others wrote, he observed, tested, and thought for himself. His notebooks would one day reflect this independence, pages filled not with borrowed ideas, but with original observations, diagrams, and questions scribbled in his famous mirror writing. From the start, Leonardo showed an unusual mix of talents. He could draw with astonishing precision, but he also asked questions that seemed endless. How do birds stay aloft? Why do rivers curve? What lies beneath the skin? In a way, his childhood was the seedbed of all his future work. Art and science sprouting from the same root, relentless curiosity. His father noticed this talent for drawing and, perhaps sensing that the boy's gifts were beyond the scope of their small town, took him to Florence when Leonardo was about 14. And Florence was like fuel to a fire. The city at that time was the beating heart of the Renaissance. Painters, sculptors, architects, and philosophers mingled in its streets. Ideas moved as freely as goods in its markets. In this atmosphere, a young Leonardo must have felt like a sponge dropped into an ocean of inspiration. It was here, in Florence, that he became an apprentice to Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the most respected artists and engineers of the day. Verrocchio's workshop was not just a place to paint. It was a Renaissance laboratory where apprentices learned everything from sculpting to mechanics. Leonardo learned to grind pigments, prepare brushes, carve wood, and cast bronze. He absorbed anatomy, perspective, and even a bit of engineering because art in Florence wasn't separate from science. It was its mirror. There's a famous story, perhaps exaggerated but too good not to tell, about Verrocchio's painting The Baptism of Christ. The young Leonardo painted one of the angels in the scene, and it was so beautifully rendered, so alive, that Verrocchio supposedly put down his brush and swore never to paint again. Whether true or not, the story captures something real. Leonardo was beginning to surpass his master. During these years, he began to keep the notebooks that would become his lifelong companions, pages filled with sketches of flowing hair that echoed water currents, diagrams of gears and pulleys, and the occasional whimsical drawing, like a dragon breathing flowers. Even as a teenager, he blurred the line between art and science. For Leonardo, there was no line, but there was also something restless in him. He was brilliant, yes, but he often left things unfinished. He started paintings he never completed. He began ideas and set them aside. Some historians suggest he may have had what we today call ADHD. If so, it didn't stop him. It just made his mind leap from one wonder to another. And in a world that liked to label people as either artist or scientist, he stubbornly refused to choose. By his late teens, Leonardo had already begun to make a name for himself, not as the legend he would one day become, but as a promising young artist with an eye that saw more than most. He was ready to step out from Verrocchio's shadow. Florence had given him the tools. Now he was about to shape the world with them. As he left his apprenticeship, his sketches were already filled with ideas that no one had asked for, inventions no one had commissioned. It was the beginning of a life that would never be content with enough. Because for Leonardo, the world was an endless question. Leonardo's years after leaving Verrocchio's workshop were like the moment when a bird, having tested its wings, finally takes flight. The city of Florence was his open sky, and he would use it to rise. Though, as with many of his flights, there would be turbulence. By the early 1470s, Leonardo had completed his apprenticeship and was accepted into the Guild of St. Luke, a professional association for artists and doctors of medicine. At only 20 years old, this was no small achievement. Membership gave him the right to open his own studio, take on commissions, and sign his works. It was a formal recognition of what many already knew. This young man was special. Yet, as would often be the case, he wasn't quite ready to settle into the predictable rhythm of a career. His early works from this period reveal an artist still experimenting but already capable of magic. One of his first major independent commissions was an altarpiece for the Chapel of St. Bernard in the Palazzo Vecchio. Yet, as with so many Leonardo projects, it was never completed. This pattern of beginning works that remained unfinished would follow him throughout life, frustrating patrons, but hinting at the restless perfectionism that defined him. What did this perfectionism look like? Imagine Leonardo painting, stepping back, frowning, then picking up the brush again, adding a detail so subtle that no one but he might notice, and still not being satisfied. It wasn't just that he wanted his works to be good, he wanted them to be alive. If the paint on the canvas failed to capture the breath in a subject's lungs, the weight in their gaze, he couldn't consider it finished. Around this time, he painted The Annunciation, a serene depiction of the angel Gabriel greeting the Virgin Mary. Most artists of the period would have treated the scene with stiff solemnity, but Leonardo's version was different. The angel kneels in a field of meticulously painted plants, every leaf and flower identifiable by species. He had gone out into the countryside to study them, sketching each detail so that his painting reflected not just an imagined setting, but nature as it truly was. Even at this early stage, he fused art with observation. Florence in the 1470s was not just an artistic hub, but a political one, dominated by the powerful Medici family. The Medici were not only patrons of the arts, but also connoisseurs of talent, and they soon took notice of the young Leonardo. Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, encouraged the flourishing of artists like Botticelli and Michelangelo. Though Leonardo never enjoyed the same deep patronage from Lorenzo as others did, the environment the Medici created was crucial to his growth. He mingled with poets, engineers and philosophers, absorbing ideas like sunlight. And yet, even in this golden city, Leonardo sometimes felt out of step. For one, his personal life was unusual. He dressed in colourful clothes, often in pink or purple tunics that stood out among the dark, conservative attire of his peers. He was known for his physical beauty, tall, athletic, with striking features, and for his charm, which drew both admiration and whispers. There were rumors about his sexuality, including accusations of sodomy, a serious charge at the time. Though the case was dropped due to lack of evidence, it left a mark on Leonardo's early years, reminding him that society was watching. But perhaps what really set him apart was his mind. While other artists were satisfied to master techniques passed down through generations, Leonardo was questioning everything. He filled pages with notes on optics, anatomy, hydraulics, and mechanics, not because anyone paid him to, but because he couldn't help himself. Why is the sky blue? How does light scatter? Why does water spiral when it drains? These were the sorts of questions scribbled between sketches of angels and machines. One humorous anecdote from this period involves a shield commissioned by his father. Ser Piero asked Leonardo to paint it for a local farmer. Instead of simply decorating it, Leonardo decided to create something terrifying. He collected lizards, snakes, crickets, bats, and other creatures, and combined their features into a monstrous, dragon-like beast. When the shield was finished, it was so frightening that his father was startled just looking at it. The farmer never got the shield. Ser Piero sold it for a high price to a merchant, replacing it with a plain one. Leonardo, barely out of adolescence, had created his first viral sensation in a world without social media. As his reputation grew, so did his opportunities. By the late 1470s, he received one of his earliest commissions for a large altarpiece, the Adoration of the Magi, intended for the monks of San Donato a Scopito. This work, though never completed, is revealing. The surviving underdrawing shows a complex scene, swirling with movement, filled with figures captured in various emotional states. The composition breaks away from the static arrangements of earlier art. It feels alive, chaotic, almost cinematic. Even in its unfinished state, it's a masterpiece. Leonardo's early experiments weren't limited to painting. He dabbled in engineering, designing bridges and machines, many of which were never built but demonstrated extraordinary foresight. He studied human anatomy, dissecting corpses when he could gain access to them, sketching muscles, bones, and tendons with precision that would make modern medical illustrators envious. At this stage, his studies were still developing, but the seeds of his later breakthroughs were already planted. One of the most telling examples of his thinking from this time is a simple observation he jotted down. The painter who draws merely by practice and by eye, without reason, is like a mirror which copies everything placed in front of it without being conscious of their existence. This wasn't just philosophy, it was a manifesto. Art, for Leonardo, was not mere imitation, it was understanding. To paint a tree, you had to know how it grew. To draw a bird, you had to know how it flew. In the early 1480s, as Florence buzzed with artistic rivalries, Michelangelo was still a boy, Botticelli was at his peak. Leonardo made a surprising decision. He left. Instead of continuing to climb the ranks of Florentine artists, he accepted an offer to work in Milan under Ludovico Sforza, known as Il Moro, the city's powerful duke. Why would he leave the art capital of the world for Milan, a city known more for trade and politics? Perhaps because Milan offered something Florence could not, the chance to be not just an artist, but an engineer, inventor, and thinker on a larger scale. Before leaving, he wrote a now famous letter to Ludovico, essentially a Renaissance-era resume. In it, he barely mentioned painting. Instead, he listed his abilities as a military engineer. He could design bridges, fortifications, cannons, and even war machines. Only at the very end did he add, almost as an afterthought, that he could also paint. This was Leonardo's way of saying, I'm not just an artist, I'm a man of ideas. And so, in 1482, carrying his notebooks and dreams, Leonardo set out for Milan. He was 29, no longer the young apprentice of Florence, but not yet the legendary figure we remember. Ahead lay some of his greatest triumphs, and some of his greatest frustrations. But as he travelled north through the changing landscapes of Italy, one thing remained constant. His eyes were open and they were hungry. Because wherever Leonardo went, he carried the same question he had as a boy staring at dragonflies. How does the world work? And how can I capture it, not just as it is, but as it could be? The road to Milan must have been long, but Leonardo travelled it not with the weariness of someone leaving home, but with the excitement of someone stepping into possibility. Florence had shaped him, Milan would challenge him, and in challenge, Leonardo thrived. When he arrived in 1482, Milan was a city of contrasts. It lacked the artistic legacy of Florence, but made up for it with ambition. Its ruler, Ludovico Sforza, known as Il Moro, was not just a politician, but a patron eager to modernize his city through art, architecture, and engineering. Leonardo, with his chameleon-like blend of skills, was the perfect man for the job, even if Milan did not yet realize the full extent of what it was getting. Leonardo's first role at Ludovico's court was not as an artist, but as a kind of Renaissance problem solver. In his famous letter to the Duke, he had promised military innovations, portable bridges, siege engines, and fortifications. It was a bold move. After all, he was not a soldier, but it worked. Ludovico was intrigued, and Leonardo was hired. For a time, he focused on engineering designs, catapults, armoured vehicles, and weapons that were, frankly, terrifying in their ingenuity. Some of his drawings from this period show a precursor to the modern tank, a round, turtle-like machine with cannons pointing in all directions. Did it ever roll onto a battlefield? No. But 5 centuries later, military engineers still marvel at the foresight of the man who conceived it. And yet, even as he designed machines of war, Leonardo filled the same notebooks with studies of flowers, flowing water, and human anatomy. This duality, the artist and the engineer, the poet and the scientist, was not a contradiction for him. To understand destruction, he studied life. To create beauty, he examined mechanics. In Leonardo's world, everything connected. His first major artistic commission in Milan was a mural, not a machine, The Last Supper. Painted on the refectory wall of Santa Maria delle Grazie, it would become one of the most analysed artworks in history. Leonardo approached it with the mind of a dramatist. Instead of the usual calm, static portrayal of Christ and the apostles, he captured the moment Jesus announces that one of them will betray him. The room erupts with emotion. Shock, anger, denial. Every figure reacts differently, their gestures and expressions choreographed with precision. Judas leans back, clutching his money bag, while Peter grips a knife. Christ remains serene in the centre, the still point in a storm of humanity. Leonardo experimented with technique, using a mix of tempera and oil on dry plaster instead of traditional fresco. This allowed him to work slowly, making revisions, but it also meant the painting began to deteriorate almost immediately. Within a few decades, it was already fading. By the 20th century, it was a ghost of itself. Still, even in its damaged state, it radiates genius. Centuries of restoration have tried to save it, but its fragility is now part of its legend, a reminder that even great beauty is mortal. During his time in Milan, Leonardo also painted portraits that broke conventions. One of the most notable is Lady with an Ermine, a portrait of Cecilia Gallerani, Ludovico's mistress. Unlike the stiff, formal portraits of the era, Leonardo's Cecilia is alive. She turns, as if caught mid-motion, her eyes glancing sideways with intelligence and mystery. She holds an ermine, a symbol of purity, and also a nod to Ludovico, who used the animal as a personal emblem. The detail of the fur, the softness of her skin, the sense of breath in her pose, all show Leonardo's mastery of making paint behave like life itself. But it wasn't just paintings that occupied his Milan years. Leonardo threw himself into engineering projects. He designed intricate canal systems to improve Milan's water supply and drainage. He studied how water moved, how it swirled and broke into foam. His drawings of eddies and currents look almost modern, like scientific visualizations from a physics lab. Centuries later, fluid dynamics researchers still marvel at the accuracy of his observations. He also turned his attention skyward. Among his many sketches are designs for flying machines, wings that flap like those of birds, parachutes shaped like pyramids, and an aerial screw that looks suspiciously like the ancestor of the helicopter. Did any of these machines ever leave the ground? Probably not. But Leonardo was undeterred. In one of his notes, he wrote, "When once you have tasted flight, you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward." Even if he never flew, his imagination soared. One of the most ambitious projects of his Milan period was a colossal bronze horse, commissioned by Ludovico to honour his father. Leonardo planned it to be the largest equestrian statue ever built, over 7 meters high. He spent years studying horse anatomy, producing sketches so detailed they're still referenced today. He even built a full-size clay model which left contemporaries in awe. Unfortunately, war intervened. When French forces invaded Milan in 1499, they destroyed the model, using it for target practice. The bronze meant for the statue was melted into cannons. Leonardo's Gran Cavallo was never completed, though a replica based on his designs was finally cast in the 20th century. Even in failure, his vision outlived him. Life at Ludovico's court was not without intrigue. Politics in Renaissance Italy were a dangerous game, and when Milan fell to the French, Leonardo's patron lost power. Leonardo fled the city, carrying little more than his notebooks. Yet those years in Milan had been transformative. They gave him the space to experiment, the resources to dream big, and the challenges that sharpened his mind. Throughout his Milan years, he kept writing in his notebooks, thousands of pages filled with drawings, ideas, and questions. These pages, later compiled as the Codex Atlanticus and other collections, reveal a mind that never rested. He sketched everything: anatomical dissections, botanical studies, architectural plans, even designs for musical instruments. Some pages contain to-do lists that feel oddly modern. Draw Milan, measure the sun, describe the tongue of the woodpecker. The last one makes people smile today, but it tells us everything about Leonardo. Who else in history thought to study a woodpecker's tongue? What made these notes remarkable was not just their content, but their form. Leonardo wrote in mirror script, from right to left, so that his notes could be read only in a mirror. Was it a secret code? Perhaps. Or maybe, as some suggest, it was simply easier for a left-handed writer to avoid smudging the ink. Either way, the effect adds to the aura of mystery surrounding his work. In Milan, he also began dissecting human bodies more systematically. He obtained corpses from hospitals and studied them in detail, producing anatomical drawings so precise that they could serve as medical diagrams today. He explored not just bones and muscles, but the mechanics of motion, how tendons pull, how the heart valves work. In one of his notes, he described the human heart as a marvelous instrument. At a time when many still believed in humours and mystical fluids, Leonardo was charting the body like a map. And then there were his philosophical musings. Scattered among his sketches are reflections on nature, life, and time. He wrote, "While I thought I was learning how to live, I have been learning how to die." It's a sentence that feels almost like poetry, and it shows that beneath the scientist's curiosity and the artist's precision, there was a philosopher asking the same questions we all do. As the 15th century came to a close, Leonardo's time in Milan ended with upheaval. Ludovico was overthrown, the city taken by French forces. Leonardo, now in his late 40s, packed his notebooks and left. He would wander to Venice, back to Florence, and eventually to France, serving new patrons and chasing new ideas. But Milan had left its mark. Here, he had learned to think bigger, to merge art and engineering, to attempt the impossible, even if it failed. When he walked away from the city, he left behind unfinished works, scattered designs, and a legacy that would take centuries to fully appreciate. Yet, for Leonardo, none of it was wasted. Every failure was a lesson, every sketch a step toward understanding. Because for him, the process, the questioning, the observing, the connecting, was the real masterpiece. As he crossed the Alps on his next journey, perhaps with snow crunching underfoot and the weight of uncertainty ahead, one thing was certain: Leonardo was not done. Not by a long shot. Leonardo's notebooks are perhaps his most intimate legacy, windows into the mind of a man who refused to stop asking questions. They are scattered, chaotic, filled with unfinished thoughts and extraordinary clarity. Within their pages, we glimpse not just an artist or an engineer, but a human being perpetually fascinated by existence itself. The surviving manuscripts amount to about 7,000 pages, though experts believe he wrote far more, many now lost to time. These pages are not orderly treatises. They are streams of consciousness, where sketches of flying machines mingle with philosophical musings, where shopping lists sit next to dissections of human muscles. If you ever wanted to know how genius thinks, you need only flip through these pages, though good luck making sense of all of them. Leonardo's handwriting, dense and in his famous mirror script, reads as if the thoughts were rushing out faster than the pen could follow. The largest collection of these writings is known as the Codex Atlanticus, a compilation of 1,119 leaves covering over 4 decades of Leonardo's life. The name Atlanticus comes not from any nautical connection, but from the large, atlas-sized sheets on which they were preserved. This codex is vast. It contains everything from military inventions to hydraulic studies, from maps to architectural sketches, from notes on mathematics to random doodles of grotesque faces. It is both a scientific archive and an artist's scrapbook. What is most remarkable is how seamlessly Leonardo blended disciplines. On one page, he might calculate the proportions of a fortification wall, and on the next, he'd sketch a flower with the care of a botanist. There's no division in his thinking. Art informs science. Science inspires art. Today, we like to compartmentalize knowledge, but Leonardo lived in a time, and with a mindset, that saw everything as connected. And perhaps that's why his work still feels so modern. Some of the inventions described in the notebooks were centuries ahead of their time. His designs for a mechanical knight, a humanoid automaton capable of sitting, moving its arms, and even lifting its visor, foreshadow modern robotics. In fact, a modern engineer, Mark Rosheim, built a working model based on Leonardo's sketches, and it functioned remarkably well. This wasn't science fiction, it was science waiting for the future to catch up. He sketched parachutes, writing that, if a man have a tent made of linen of which the apertures have been stopped up, and it be 12 braccia across and 12 in depth, he will be able to throw himself down from any great height without sustaining any injury. Centuries later, when Adrian Nicholas tested a parachute built to Leonardo's specifications, it worked perfectly. The Renaissance man had beaten the Wright brothers to the concept of safe descent, only no one in his time dared to jump. Among his most famous designs is the aerial screw, a helical device that resembles a primitive helicopter. Leonardo believed that by spinning fast enough, it would lift into the air. Of course, with the materials and engines available in the 15th century, it was impossible. Still, the idea was astonishing. Helicopter pioneer Igor Sikorsky once said that Leonardo's design was a great step in the history of aviation, even if it never flew. And then there were his water studies. Leonardo was obsessed with the movement of water. He sketched whirlpools, waterfalls, and river currents, noting how water carved rock, how eddies formed, how droplets combined. In his notebooks, water is not just a physical substance, but a metaphor. In time and with water, everything changes, he wrote. Modern hydrologists have found that many of his observations on fluid dynamics were startlingly accurate. He noticed patterns we now describe mathematically, centuries before the equations existed. One particularly curious entry lists tasks for himself. Draw Milan. Find the measurement of the sun. Get a skull. Describe the tongue of the woodpecker. That last one, the woodpecker's tongue, has fascinated people for centuries. Why would he care about something so specific? Modern scientists have actually studied this bird and found its tongue wraps around its skull, cushioning its brain from the shock of pecking. Leonardo didn't know this, of course, but he sensed there was something worth investigating. His curiosity was microscopic and cosmic at once. It's easy to romanticize these notebooks, but they also reveal a very human side of Leonardo. Amid the sketches of inventions and studies of anatomy, he scribbled grocery lists and personal reminders. In one, he writes simply, "Buy socks." Genius, it turns out, also has cold feet. The notebooks are also filled with humour, though perhaps unintentionally. On one page, alongside serious diagrams of geometry, he doodles absurd faces, exaggerated noses, crooked eyes, comical expressions. It's as if, in between unlocking the secrets of the universe, he amused himself by caricaturing humanity. Some scholars believe these grotesques reflect his interest in physiognomy, the idea that facial features reveal character, or maybe he just liked to laugh. Another mystery of the notebooks is his use of mirror writing. He wrote from right to left, forcing readers to use a mirror to decipher the text. Was it a code to protect his ideas? A way to keep nosy eyes away? Perhaps. But many historians believe it was simply practical. Leonardo was left-handed, and writing this way prevented smudging. Still, The mirrored text adds a layer of enigma, making his notebooks feel like secret diaries. What's striking is how few of his inventions were ever built in his lifetime. Some were impractical with the technology of the day, others simply remained drawings. Leonardo often conceived ideas far beyond what his era could handle. It's tempting to imagine how history might have changed if his designs had been realized. Would Renaissance Europe have had helicopters, tanks, and robots? Probably not. But the fact that one man could imagine them centuries ahead is, in itself, extraordinary. The Codex Atlanticus is not the only collection of his notes. There's the Codex Leicester, which Bill Gates purchased in 1994 for over $30 million, making it the most expensive book ever sold. This manuscript focuses largely on water, astronomy, and geology. In it, Leonardo speculates about fossils found in mountains, concluding, correctly, that these were once sea creatures, evidence that the land had been underwater. At a time when most explanations invoked biblical floods, Leonardo was thinking in terms of geological time. The Codex on the flight of birds shows his studies on aerodynamics. He observed how birds tilt their wings, how air flows over feathers, how lift is generated. He even speculated about the center of gravity in flying creatures. Modern aviation engineers have studied these notes with admiration. Leonardo was, in essence, writing the first theories of flight. What makes the notebooks so fascinating is not just the brilliance of individual ideas, but the sheer scope of them. Leonardo didn't restrict himself to one field. He wrote about astronomy, drawing the moon's surface with surprising accuracy and noting how Earthshine illuminated the dark part of the moon, centuries before Galileo confirmed it with a telescope. He wrote about fossils, correctly suggesting that shells found in the mountains were ancient sea life, challenging the prevailing religious explanations. He even dabbled in what we might call psychology, noting how emotions manifest in facial expressions and body language. But for all this knowledge, Leonardo never published a book. Unlike Galileo or Newton, he didn't consolidate his discoveries into a single volume that could change the world. His ideas stayed locked in those pages, accessible only to those who found them centuries later. Some historians lament this, arguing that his genius was wasted. But perhaps it wasn't waste. Perhaps the notebooks were not meant to be polished treatises, but living records of a mind in motion. They were his way of thinking out loud, in ink. In his writings, he often reflects on knowledge itself. Iron rusts from disuse, water loses its purity from stagnation, and inaction saps the vigour of the mind. For Leonardo, to stop learning was to decay. His notebooks are proof that he never stopped. When the French invaded Milan and scattered the court of Ludovico Sforza, Leonardo carried these notebooks with him. They were his treasure, more valuable than gold. They followed him across Italy, to Venice, back to Florence, to Rome, and eventually to France, where he would spend his final years. They were not organised for publication, not neatly arranged, but they contained a universe. Centuries later, scholars pieced them together like a puzzle. Some pages are still missing, hidden in private collections or lost forever. But even the fragments we have are enough to astonish. They show us a man who saw the world not as a set of separate subjects, but as one great interconnected system. And maybe that's the lesson of the notebooks. To Leonardo, art was science, science was art, and curiosity was the thread that bound it all. The pages remind us that to understand the world, you must look at it from every angle, and never stop asking questions, even about something as small as the tongue of a woodpecker. As Leonardo left Milan with his pages in tow, he wasn't just carrying sketches, he was carrying the future. Leonardo da Vinci's reputation as one of the greatest artists in history rests largely on a surprisingly small number of surviving paintings. Scholars estimate that only about 15 of his works have come down to us. 15. Michelangelo left far more. Raphael, countless more. Yet these few Leonardo masterpieces, enigmatic, technically revolutionary, and emotionally profound, are enough to secure his immortality. They are not just paintings, they are puzzles, mirrors, windows into the mind of a genius. By the time he began painting The Last Supper, Leonardo was already an established figure at the Milanese court, known for his versatility. Yet no one could have predicted how radically he would reinterpret one of Christianity's most familiar scenes. Traditional depictions of the Last Supper showed Christ and the apostles lined up like statues, serene and emotionless, often with halos like neat labels over their heads. Leonardo threw all of this out. Instead, he chose the moment of drama, the second after Jesus says, "One of you will betray me." The reaction is instantaneous. Bartholomew, James the Lesser, and Andrew recoil in shock, their hands raised as if to say, "What did we just hear?" Judas leans back into shadow, clutching the money bag, his face tense. Peter grips a knife, his body twisting toward the betrayer. John collapses toward Christ, overwhelmed by grief. And in the center sits Jesus, calm, hands open, forming a triangle, a symbol of divinity and balance amidst chaos. The table becomes a stage, the apostles actors in a drama that transcends time. Leonardo's genius lay not just in the composition, but in the psychology. Each figure has an inner life, a distinct personality. Art historian Giorgio Vasari wrote that the painting captured the very movements of the soul. You don't just see the scene, you feel it. Technically, Leonardo also experimented. Instead of true fresco, which requires painting quickly onto wet plaster, he applied tempera and oil onto dry plaster, hoping to achieve richer detail. The result was luminous at first. Unfortunately, the technique failed. The paint began to flake within years, and by the 16th century, the mural was already in ruins. Later restorations, some heavy-handed, further altered it. Napoleon's soldiers used the refectory as a stable, and during World War II, a bomb hit the convent, leaving the wall exposed to the elements. Miraculously, the central figures survived. Even in its damaged state, the Last Supper is haunting. Visitors to Santa Maria delle Grazie today often describe an eerie experience. The painting seems to breathe, as if the figures are caught forever in that single, trembling moment between revelation and action. Leonardo had intended to capture life itself, and in a strange way he succeeded, even in decay. While The Last Supper stunned Milan, another painting, begun years later in Florence, would capture the world. The Mona Lisa is perhaps the most famous painting ever created, and also one of the most misunderstood. To Leonardo, it was not just a portrait, it was an experiment in capturing the human soul. The sitter is widely believed to be Lisa Gherardini, the wife of Florentine merchant Francesco del Giocondo. Yet Leonardo never delivered the portrait to the family. Instead, he kept it with him, travelling with it for years, touching it up, refining it. It became his companion, his obsession. Some say he worked on it for over a decade, adding layers of glaze so thin they're almost invisible, achieving a softness unlike anything else in Renaissance art. The most famous feature, of course, is her smile. Is it a smile of joy, sadness, mystery? The answer depends on when you look and how. Leonardo used a technique called sfumato, smokiness, blending tones so subtly that the boundaries vanish. The corners of her mouth curve slightly upward, but the shadows around them create ambiguity. Neuroscientists have studied this optical effect and found that depending on which part of the face you focus on, the expression changes. Leonardo didn't paint an emotion, he painted the possibility of emotion. Her eyes follow you too, another optical trick. They're slightly averted, yet always seem to meet yours. Her gaze is calm, knowing, almost playful, as if she holds a secret she'll never tell. That's part of the painting's magic. It interacts with the viewer. Beyond the smile and eyes, the background of the Mona Lisa is equally fascinating. It's a dreamlike landscape, with winding rivers, jagged mountains, and misty valleys. The horizon doesn't align perfectly on both sides, creating a subtle sense of movement, as if nature itself shifts behind her. Leonardo often wrote about how humans are part of nature, and in this painting she seems to emerge from the earth itself. Scientific studies of the painting have revealed layer upon layer of innovation. Infrared scans show underdrawings, adjustments Leonardo made as he worked. Chemical analyses reveal his use of ultra-thin glazes to create depth. Even her skin texture under magnification reveals the careful work of a man painting not just a surface, but light itself. But perhaps the most interesting mystery is why Leonardo never considered the Mona Lisa finished. He carried it with him to France in his final years, still touching it, still adjusting it. To him, it was alive. And how do you finish something alive? When he died in 1519, the painting was in his possession, eventually acquired by King Francis I, and centuries later it found its home in the Louvre. Today, it attracts millions of visitors annually, guarded like a treasure. And yet, through bulletproof glass and the jostling of cameras, her smile remains undisturbed. Leonardo's other portraits from this period also deserve attention. Ginevra de Benci, painted earlier in his career, shows a young woman with an enigmatic expression, a sort of proto-Mona Lisa. La Belle Ferronnière radiates strength, her eyes sharp, almost challenging. These works were revolutionary because they captured not just likeness, but psychology. Leonardo wrote in his notes, "A good painter has to paint two main things, the man and the intention of his soul." His portraits breathe. Not all of his masterpieces survived. Leda and the Swan, known from copies, depicted the mythological figure in an intimate, twisting pose, surrounded by swan and children. The original is lost, destroyed, or hidden. No one knows. Salvator Mundi, attributed to Leonardo, re-emerged in recent years, sparking debates about authenticity. When it sold for $450 million in 2017, it became the most expensive painting ever sold, yet its current location is a mystery. Leonardo's artistry was not limited to portraiture or murals. His unfinished Adoration of the Magi shows a composition of astonishing complexity, swirling figures, ruins, horses, gestures that seem to vibrate with energy. Even unfinished, it influenced generations of artists. His St. John the Baptist, with its twisting figure and sly smile, exudes an almost modern sensuality, challenging the boundaries of religious art. What's extraordinary about Leonardo's paintings is how few there are, and how each one feels monumental. He was slow, meticulous, easily distracted by other projects. Patrons were often exasperated. There's a story that the monks at Santa Maria delle Grazie begged him to finish the Last Supper as he wandered off for days at a time, painting only a stroke or two when inspiration struck. But Leonardo didn't work by schedule. He worked by vision. He once wrote, "Art is never finished, only abandoned." Perhaps that's why his paintings feel alive, because to him, they were never truly done. Modern science continues to uncover new layers in his art. Multispectral imaging reveals hidden underdrawings. Chemical analysis finds materials from distant lands, suggesting a trade network of pigments. Even the varnishes tell stories of time and touch. Every decade, new discoveries remind us that these works are not static relics, but evolving mysteries. Art historians often ask, why do Leonardo's paintings still move us so deeply? Perhaps because they blend precision with ambiguity. The details are meticulous, every fold of cloth, every glimmer of light, but the emotions are elusive. You can look at the Mona Lisa 1,000 times and still not be sure what she feels. You can stand before the Last Supper and sense a silence that speaks louder than words. Leonardo understood that life itself is a mix of clarity and mystery, and he painted that truth. In the end, his artistic triumphs were not just technical. They were human. They remind us that to see the world, really see it, is to capture not just shapes and colours, but the breath between them. When Leonardo left Milan, carrying the Mona Lisa with him, he carried more than a painting. He carried a piece of himself, the part that never stopped wondering. Among all of Leonardo da Vinci's drawings, none is more iconic than the Vitruvian Man, a naked male figure, standing with arms and legs extended, inscribed within a circle and a square. At first glance, it looks like a simple study of proportion, but as with everything Leonardo touched, it's far more than that. It's a fusion of art, science, philosophy, and the Renaissance belief in harmony between the human body and the universe. The drawing takes its name from Vitruvius, a Roman architect and engineer who lived in the 1st century BCE. Vitruvius wrote that the proportions of the human body are a model for perfection in architecture, that a well-proportioned man fits neatly into both a circle and a square. The square represents the material world, stability, and order. The circle represents the divine, the infinite, and the cosmic. To place a man at the centre of both is to say, humanity itself is the measure of all things. Leonardo was fascinated by this idea. In the late 1480s or early 1490s, while he was in Milan, he set out to test Vitruvius's claims. He didn't just copy the Romans' text, he studied actual bodies. He measured limbs, torsos, heads, carefully noting ratios. In his notebook he wrote, "From the roots of the hair to the bottom of the chin is 1/10 of the height of a man. From the bottom of the chin to the top of the head is 1/8. The notes go on, listing proportions with mathematical precision. Leonardo was not content with theory. He wanted proof. The resulting drawing is a masterpiece of clarity. The man stands in two overlapping positions, arms stretched to the square and the circle, suggesting both motion and stillness. The lines are clean, the pose elegant, the proportions idealized but based on observation. This was not just art, it was a diagram, a scientific visualization centuries ahead of its time. What makes the Vitruvian Man extraordinary is its symbolism. For Renaissance thinkers, it encapsulated the belief that the human being is a microcosm, a small version of the universe. Just as the cosmos is governed by mathematical laws, so is the body. To understand one is to understand the other. Leonardo's drawing embodies this philosophy visually, man as the center of everything, bridging earth and heaven. Some historians argue that Leonardo subtly challenged Vitruvius. The Romans' proportions were theoretical, Leonardo's were empirical. He based his version on actual measurements, adjusting the figure to fit reality. In doing so, he shifted the focus from abstract ideals to observation, the essence of Renaissance science. This fascination with proportion was not limited to one drawing. Throughout his notebooks, Leonardo analyzed the human body with the rigor of a modern anatomist. He dissected corpses in secret, sketching muscles, bones, tendons, organs. His anatomical drawings are so accurate that they could be used in medical textbooks today. In one series, he meticulously shows how the human spine curves, how the ribs attach, how the heart's valves function. These studies were not just scientific, they were works of art in themselves, combining precision with beauty. His investigations into anatomy went beyond description. He asked why. Why does the body move as it does? How do the muscles interact? How do the lungs inflate? He compared the human body to machines, levers, pulleys, pumps. At the same time, he saw machines as extensions of the human body. This interplay of biology and mechanics informed both his art and engineering. One of his most remarkable discoveries was the structure of the heart. Leonardo was the first to correctly describe how the aortic valve works, observing the swirling pattern of blood flow that helps the valve close. Modern cardiologists, using advanced imaging, confirmed his observations only in the 20th century. Imagine, a man with no formal medical training, working by candlelight, dissecting a heart with his own hands, saw something that science would take 400 years to catch up with. His studies also extended to the proportions of the face. He wrote about the golden ratio, a mathematical proportion often found in nature, and explored how it applied to human beauty. Though he never explicitly mentions the term, his sketches show an intuitive understanding of it. The positioning of the eyes, the width of the nose, the shape of the mouth, all followed patterns he observed in life. The Vitruvian Man reflects all of this: observation, mathematics, philosophy. It's also deeply personal. Leonardo believed that to draw the body, you must know it inside out. He once wrote, "The painter who does not know the anatomy of animals is as useless as a sculptor who does not know the anatomy of man." For him, art and science were inseparable, but the drawing is not just a scientific diagram. It's almost mystical. The circle and square around the man echo ancient symbols. The circle as heaven, the square as earth. The figure stands between them, arms and legs extended, as if reaching for both. It's as if Leonardo is saying, humans are the link between the material and the divine. This was a radical, human-centered vision in an age still dominated by religious dogma. Interestingly, the Vitruvian Man was not widely known in Leonardo's time. It remained hidden in his papers, unknown to the world until centuries later. When it was rediscovered, it became an icon of the Renaissance, and later of science and art alike. Today, it appears everywhere, in textbooks, logos, advertisements. It has been overused to the point of cliché, yet the original drawing still radiates the power of its idea. Modern researchers have analysed the drawing with computers, measuring the ratios Leonardo used. They found that while close to Vitruvius's prescriptions, the figure is not perfectly mathematical. It's human, slightly asymmetrical, subtly dynamic. This imperfection is what makes it alive. Leonardo was not chasing sterile geometry. He was capturing the living reality of the body. His obsession with proportion also extended to architecture. He applied the same principles to buildings, designing ideal cities with streets arranged according to geometric harmony, buildings aligned to human scale. In his notebooks, he sketched floor plans where every part related to the whole, echoing the relationship between the human body and the universe. Sadly, none of these cities were built, but the ideas influenced later architects. The Vitruvian Man also reflects Leonardo's belief in the unity of knowledge. To him, studying the body was not separate from studying the stars, or rivers, or machines. He wrote, "Everything comes from everything, and everything is made out of everything, and everything returns into everything." The drawing is a visual manifesto of this belief. And of course, there is the artistry. Even as he measured and calculated, Leonardo drew with grace. The lines are confident, the shading delicate. The figure is idealized yet believable. You can almost feel the muscles stretching, the weight shifting slightly. It's not just a diagram, it's a person. The drawing has inspired countless interpretations. Some see it as a symbol of humanism, the Renaissance belief in the dignity and potential of man. Others see it as an early expression of biomechanics, a precursor to modern scientific visualization. Still others see it as a philosophical statement that we exist in balance between earth and sky, finite and infinite. It's also a reminder of Leonardo's restless mind. The drawing is beautiful, yes, but it's also a question. What is the measure of man? Is it physical proportion? Is it the mind that seeks to understand those proportions? Is it the capacity to bridge science and art? Leonardo never gives an answer, but he invites us to wonder. Humour, too, lurks in his studies of the body. Among his anatomical sketches are caricatures, distorted faces, exaggerated features. It's as if, after hours of dissecting and measuring, he allowed himself a laugh. Genius, it seems, enjoys play. The original Vitruvian Man is fragile, kept under strict conditions at the Gallery dell'Accademia in Venice. It's rarely displayed to protect it from light and wear. When it does appear, it draws crowds who often stand in awe. They're not just looking at a drawing, they're looking at an idea that has travelled across 5 centuries. As Leonardo continued his studies, the Vitruvian Man remained a touchstone. He returned again and again to the relationship between the body and the world, measuring, sketching, thinking. For him, proportion was not just a rule of design, it was a key to understanding existence. When we look at the drawing today, we see more than lines on paper. We see a moment when art, science, and philosophy converged. We see a man who believed that to know the world, you must first know yourself. And we see perhaps a reflection of ourselves, reaching out still for the circle and the square. Leonardo da Vinci is often remembered first as a painter, but he was equally, and perhaps more intensely, an inventor. His mind was a workshop of ideas, constantly churning out designs for machines that wouldn't be built for centuries. He wasn't content to simply imagine what existed, he imagined what could exist. This was not invention as mere novelty, but as a natural extension of his relentless curiosity. While working as an engineer and artist in Milan, and later in other Italian cities, Leonardo sketched hundreds of machines. Some were refinements of existing technology, others were entirely original. Many were so ahead of their time that they remained impractical, waiting for materials and knowledge that would not appear until the industrial age. Yet even his failures revealed a mind thinking centuries into the future. Leonardo's fascination with flight bordered on obsession. His notebooks overflow with sketches of wings, gliders, and devices inspired by birds and bats. He carefully studied how birds flapped, how they tilted their wings to catch air currents, how their feathers adjusted during flight. He even dissected birds to understand the mechanics of flight. One of his most famous designs is the ornithopter, a device with large wings meant to be powered by human muscle. The design looks like something out of a fantasy novel, a wooden frame with flapping wings, straps for the pilot, and a system of pulleys. Modern engineers agree it would never have worked. Human strength alone is insufficient for powered flight. But the principle was sound. Leonardo was analysing aerodynamics centuries before the Wright brothers. Another brilliant concept was the aerial screw, often called the first helicopter. It consisted of a spiral rotor, a helix-shaped blade designed to compress air and lift the machine upward. Without a proper engine, the design couldn't leave the ground, but its resemblance to modern helicopters is striking. When a model was built in 2013 using his specifications, it demonstrated some lifting capability. Leonardo had imagined vertical flight 400 years before anyone else achieved it. He also sketched parachutes. His design featured a pyramid-shaped canopy made of linen, supported by wooden poles. He claimed that a man with this device could jump from any height without injury. In 2000, skydiver Adrian Nicholas tested a parachute built according to Leonardo's design. It worked. Leonardo's prediction, written in the 15th century, was accurate to the letter. Though often portrayed as a gentle humanist, Leonardo also designed weapons, and some were terrifying. His letter to Ludovico Sforza boasted of his ability to create very light and strong bridges, and mortars and catapults of marvellous effect. Among his designs was a massive crossbow, so large it required wheels to move. The bow itself was 27 feet wide, designed to launch enormous projectiles. It was unlikely to be practical in battle, but it demonstrated his talent for thinking on an epic scale. More intriguing was his design for an armoured vehicle, often called the first tank. The sketch shows a circular, turtle shell-like machine with slanted sides to deflect enemy fire. Inside, men would crank handles to rotate gears, moving the tank forward while cannons protruded from its perimeter. In tests by modern engineers, they discovered the gears in Leonardo's drawing were intentionally reversed, meaning the vehicle wouldn't work as drawn. Was this an error? Or was Leonardo sabotaging his own design to prevent misuse? Given his pacifist tendencies, the latter seems possible. Leonardo's war machines also included multi-barreled cannons, which could fire volleys more rapidly than traditional weapons, and designs for mobile fortifications. He even sketched a scythe chariot, a cart with rotating blades attached to its wheels, reminiscent of ancient war machines, but mechanized for greater devastation. None of these inventions were built in his lifetime, but they reveal a mind capable of reimagining warfare. Interestingly, Leonardo seemed conflicted about his weapons. In his notes, he often expressed disgust for war, calling it madness. He may have designed weapons partly to secure patronage. After all, dukes paid for military technology, but his real passion lay elsewhere, in machines that mimicked life. One of Leonardo's most surprising creations was his mechanical knight, designed around 1495. This humanoid automaton could sit, raise its arms, and move its head and jaw. Inside, a system of pulleys and gears operated its limbs. Modern reconstructions have proven the design works. This makes Leonardo not just an inventor of machines, but one of the first roboticists in history. Imagine a Renaissance court seeing a knight that moved on its own. It would have seemed like magic. He also sketched designs for self-operating carts, powered by coiled springs, which could move without being pushed. Essentially, he invented the first programmable vehicle. Modern engineers who built it found it could indeed follow a set path. This combination of mechanical ingenuity and theatrical imagination was uniquely Leonardo. Water fascinated Leonardo as much as flight. He designed water-lifting devices, improved canal systems, and even conceptualized a machine to clean rivers. His hydraulic studies were decades ahead of their time. He noticed how water created spirals and vortices, patterns now studied in fluid dynamics. In one sketch, he drew a dam with gates that could control water flow, a precursor to modern flood control systems. He also proposed ambitious architectural projects, including an ideal city with separate levels for pedestrians and carts, wide streets to prevent congestion, and advanced sanitation to avoid disease. These ideas were never realized, but they anticipated the urban planning of the 19th and 20th centuries. Leonardo's dissections of the human body were groundbreaking. He designed surgical instruments, including a device to measure pulse and tools for cranial surgery. He sketched the first known accurate depiction of the human spine, the first description of the appendix, and a detailed study of the brain's ventricles. His understanding of anatomy was not matched until centuries later. Some of his notes suggest he grasped concepts of circulation long before William Harvey's discoveries. One particularly fascinating medical sketch shows a mechanical model of the heart valves, demonstrating how blood swirls to close them. When cardiologists tested his observations in the 21st century using MRI technology, they confirmed Leonardo was correct. He had understood a principle modern medicine took hundreds of years to rediscover. Leonardo's genius also extended to music and theatre. He designed complex stage machinery for plays, including devices to make actors fly, rotating scenery, and sound effects. He invented instruments such as the viola organista, a hybrid between a keyboard and a bowed string instrument. This device, rediscovered in his notebooks centuries later, was built by Polish musician Sławomir Zubrzycki in 2013, and it works, producing a haunting, cello-like sound. He also sketched mechanical drums, water-powered organs, and even a machine to record music automatically. These inventions show a playful side to Leonardo, merging art and technology. Why were so few of Leonardo's machines built? Some were impractical with the materials of his day. Wood, leather, and primitive metalwork couldn't withstand the stresses his designs required. Others were too costly or too complex for Renaissance patrons. Some, like his weapons, may have been deliberately sabotaged or left incomplete. But the true value of these inventions is not in whether they worked then, but in how they anticipated the future. Modern engineers have reconstructed many of his machines, often finding they function surprisingly well. NASA has even studied his ornithopter and aerial screw designs, finding principles still relevant to aeronautics. Leonardo's notebooks, once dismissed as the doodles of a dreamer, are now recognized as blueprints of genius. One cannot help but smile at the small details in his designs. He sometimes added notes to himself, like, "Remember to grease the wheels," or "Do not forget to check the balance." These mundane reminders make him human, reminding us that even a genius needs to jot down the obvious. There's also humour in his machines. Some sketches show fantastical contraptions that seem almost like jokes. A machine to stretch the bodies of prisoners, likely satirical, or a design for a device to polish the philosopher's stone, a wink at alchemy. Leonardo played with ideas, serious or not, because to him, thinking itself was a form of play. Though many of his machines were never built, Leonardo's inventions shaped the way we think about technology. He approached problems not just with practicality, but with imagination. He blended observation with creativity, science with art. In his time, this holistic thinking was rare. Today, we call it interdisciplinary. Leonardo lived it. His inventions remind us that progress often begins as sketches in a notebook, ideas that seem impossible. They teach us that curiosity is the seed of innovation, and that the future belongs to those who dare to imagine it. When we look at his flying machines, tanks, and robots, we see not just devices, but dreams, and though the world of his time wasn't ready to build them, ours was. Leonardo, in many ways, invented the future. As he continued to design, to sketch, to question, he must have known most of these ideas would never leave the page. But perhaps that didn't matter. For Leonardo, the act of imagining was itself a triumph, because for him, the limit of what can be done is not what's possible now, but what's possible one day. Leonardo's life was a masterpiece in motion, but it was also a portrait of restlessness. He was not the kind of man who settled into a routine or calmly worked through a checklist. He was driven by an energy that seemed to pull him in 100 directions at once, an energy that could be both a gift and a curse. Patrons loved him for his brilliance, yet many grew impatient with his inability to finish commissions. Even his friends occasionally despaired at his tendency to wander off mid-project, chasing a new idea with the same intensity as the one he had just abandoned. This restlessness showed early. He rarely completed the works he began, and when he did, they often took years. The Adoration of the Magi, left unfinished, the monumental horse for Ludovico Sforza, never cast in bronze. Even the Mona Lisa, which he kept with him until his death, never reached a point where he felt it was truly done. For Leonardo, completion was less important than pursuit. The act of creation, the process of learning and experimenting, mattered more than the finished object. Modern psychologists have speculated that Leonardo may have had attention deficit traits, the inability to focus on one task for long, coupled with bursts of hyperfocus when something truly captivated him. His notebooks reveal this pattern. Pages jump from anatomical studies to weapon designs to jokes to philosophical reflections, all within a few lines. One moment he's dissecting the mechanics of flight, the next he's doodling a grotesque face with an enormous nose. His mind was a kaleidoscope, constantly shifting, yet to call this restlessness a flaw misses the point. It was precisely this refusal to stay in one lane that made him extraordinary. The Renaissance celebrated the idea of the universal man, someone skilled in many disciplines. Leonardo didn't just fit this ideal, he redefined it. His curiosity had no boundaries, and though it sometimes prevented him from finishing things, it also allowed him to connect fields that others kept separate. His working style baffled many patrons. When he painted The Last Supper, the monks of Santa Maria delle Grazie grew frustrated, as Leonardo would disappear for days, then suddenly reappear to make a single brush stroke. They thought he was lazy, but he was not idle. He was thinking, planning, rehearsing in his mind. He once told a patron that painting required as much observation and reflection as actual application. "Men of lofty genius," he wrote, "when they are doing the least work, are most active." He could also be eccentric in his habits. He often worked through the night, sleeping in short naps rather than a long stretch, a pattern now called polyphasic sleep. This allowed him more hours to think, sketch, and experiment. He was famously vegetarian, unusual for his time, and bought birds from markets just to release them, acts of compassion that hint at a deep empathy for living things. His appearance was equally distinctive. He wore colourful tunics that reached his knees, ignored the fashion for dark robes, and let his beard grow long and flowing. To his contemporaries, he must have seemed both brilliant and strange, a man apart. There were also darker sides to his restlessness. Leonardo was haunted by self-doubt, something surprisingly common among geniuses. He often criticised himself in his notes, calling himself a man without letters because he lacked formal training in Latin and Greek. He worried that he was wasting time, that he would die without completing anything of worth. This self-criticism may explain why he kept returning to the same works, revising them endlessly. Perfection was a goal forever out of reach. Financially, his wandering approach created difficulties. Unlike many artists who secured steady patronage, Leonardo often had to move from city to city, seeking support. After the fall of Ludovico Sforza, he fled Milan with little more than his notebooks. In Venice, he briefly worked as a military engineer, designing defences against potential Turkish invasions. Later, he returned to Florence, then Rome, and eventually to France. Each move was both an escape and an opportunity, driven by politics as much as by his own inability to stay still. Despite his nomadic career, Leonardo was rarely without admirers. In Florence, he encountered the young Michelangelo, whose fiery temperament clashed with his own calm demeanour. The two reportedly exchanged insults. Michelangelo mocking Leonardo for never finishing anything, Leonardo retorting about Michelangelo's brooding nature. Their rivalry was more than gossip, it reflected two different visions of art. Michelangelo was intense, focused, driven by a single vision. Leonardo was exploratory, experimental, always searching. During his time in Florence in the early 1500s, he took on the commission for the Battle of Anghiari, a mural intended for the Palazzo Vecchio. The work was to depict a chaotic clash of soldiers and horses, a scene full of energy. Leonardo devised an experimental technique, using oil paints on a specially prepared wall. Unfortunately, the paint didn't adhere properly. As he worked, the colours began to drip and fade. Frustrated, he abandoned the project. The unfinished mural was later destroyed, surviving only in sketches and copies. Even in failure, the work influenced artists like Rubens, who studied the dynamic composition. His working style extended beyond art. When he studied anatomy, he didn't simply dissect and draw. He questioned, why do tendons move this way? What is the purpose of each bone? He filled his notes with observations, but rarely wrote final conclusions. This open-ended approach was both a strength and a weakness. It kept him learning, but it also meant his discoveries weren't shared widely in his time. Had he published his anatomical studies, medicine might have advanced centuries earlier. His experiments often straddled the line between genius and impracticality. He tested new painting techniques that failed, designed machines that couldn't be built, and started countless projects that were never finished. Yet these failures were part of his method. Leonardo treated life as an experiment, and experiments, by nature, sometimes fail. Even his personal relationships reflected his restless spirit. He never married, never had children, and seemed to prefer companionship over romance. He surrounded himself with students and assistants, the most famous being Francesco Melzi, who remained with him until his death. Others, like Gian Giacomo Caprotti, known as Salai, were more troublesome, described in Leonardo's notes as a thief and liar, yet he kept them close. Perhaps he valued the chaos they brought as much as their help. The scattered nature of his career also meant that many of his works were lost. Panels he began vanished into obscurity, projects left incomplete were dismantled, inventions forgotten until rediscovered centuries later. To contemporaries, he may have seemed unreliable. To history, he is irreplaceable. It's tempting to ask, what if Leonardo had been more focused, more conventional, more willing to finish what he started? Would we have more of his art, more of his discoveries? Perhaps, but then he wouldn't have been Leonardo. His brilliance came from the very restlessness that kept him moving. He saw connections others didn't because he wandered across boundaries. He asked questions no one else thought to ask because he refused to stay still long enough to accept simple answers. In his later years, this restlessness softened into something quieter. When he moved to France under the patronage of King Francis I, he brought with him only a few paintings and his beloved notebooks. There, in the chateau of Clos-Lucé, he lived more peacefully, surrounded by students and gardens. Yet even then, he continued to sketch, to ponder, to question. He designed canals for the Loire Valley, studied the flow of rivers, drew architectural plans he never built. Age slowed his hand, but not his mind. Leonardo's restlessness wasn't aimless. It was a hunger for knowledge, for understanding, for beauty. It pushed him to dissect corpses despite church prohibitions, to climb hills and sketch clouds, to take apart clocks and rebuild them. It was the same hunger that drove him to ask, in one note, why does the sky appear blue? And in another, what is the soul? This constant questioning makes his work feel alive even now. When we read his notes, we don't just see facts, we hear a voice asking, why? When we look at his paintings, we don't just see images, we feel the searching behind them. Leonardo reminds us that genius is not a matter of answers, but of questions pursued with passion. Near the end of his life, he wrote, "As a well-spent day brings happy sleep, so a life well used brings happy death." His days may have seemed scattered, but they were well spent. His life, restless as it was not wasted. It was a tapestry woven from countless threads, some cut short, some frayed, but together forming something magnificent. Restlessness, for Leonardo, was not a flaw. It was the beating heart of his genius. It kept him moving, thinking, dreaming. And in that motion, he changed the world. Leonardo da Vinci died more than 5 centuries ago, yet his legacy continues to ripple through time, touching disciplines as diverse as art, engineering, anatomy, architecture, and even genetics. His influence is so vast that it's easy to forget just how revolutionary he was for his own era. The Renaissance produced many brilliant figures, but Leonardo was different. He didn't just contribute to knowledge, he changed the way humans think about the world and their place in it. After his death in 1519 at Clos-Lucé in the Loire Valley of France, his belongings were left primarily to his devoted pupil, Francesco Melzi. Among them were the now famous notebooks, thousands of pages filled with sketches, diagrams, and reflections. Melzi worked to preserve them, but after his own death, many pages were scattered, sold, or lost. Over the centuries, these fragments reappeared in private collections, libraries, and archives, forming the basis of what we now know about Leonardo's thinking. Every time a missing page resurfaces, it's like hearing the voice of the master whisper across time. Leonardo's art quickly became legendary after his death. The Mona Lisa, once simply a portrait of a Florentine merchant's wife, became an icon of mystery and beauty. The Last Supper, despite its decay, inspired generations of artists. Even his unfinished works, like The Adoration of the Magi or the lost mural Battle of Anghiari, shaped the development of Western art. Michelangelo, Raphael, and countless others learned from his innovations in composition, perspective, and the depiction of emotion. His style influenced not only painters, but also sculptors and architects. In science and engineering, Leonardo's contributions were less immediately recognized, mostly because he never published his discoveries. His anatomical studies, locked away in notebooks, were centuries ahead of their time. When these drawings were finally examined in the 18th and 19th centuries, anatomists were stunned by their accuracy. His sketches of the heart, brain, and muscles anticipated findings confirmed only with modern medical tools. British surgeon Francis Wells once remarked that Leonardo's studies of the heart revealed knowledge that would not be rediscovered for hundreds of years. The same applies to his mechanical inventions. Although his machines were rarely built during his lifetime, their rediscovery in the 19th and 20th centuries revealed a visionary mind. Engineers marvelled at his helicopter-like aerial screw, his early concept of a tank, and his self-propelled cart, which functions like a primitive robot. In recent decades, NASA has even studied his sketches to better understand aerodynamic concepts. His ideas may not have taken flight in the 15th century, but they soared into relevance in the modern era. Beyond his tangible creations, Leonardo's greatest legacy may be his approach to knowledge. He didn't separate disciplines into rigid categories. To him, painting required anatomy. Anatomy required mechanics, mechanics required mathematics, and mathematics required observation of nature. This holistic vision has inspired modern thinkers who advocate for breaking down the barriers between science, art, and technology. In an age where specialization dominates, Leonardo reminds us of the power of curiosity that crosses boundaries. His influence has seeped into culture as well. Writers, filmmakers, and even conspiracy theorists have turned to him for inspiration. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code may play fast and loose with historical facts, but it demonstrates how the aura of mystery surrounding Leonardo captivates popular imagination. Movies and documentaries often depict him as the archetype of the genius, eccentric, visionary, and ahead of his time. Even the term Renaissance man owes much of its meaning to his example. In recent years, science has added new dimensions to our understanding of Leonardo. Genetic research has begun to explore his lineage. Historians long knew that Leonardo had no children, but they traced his family line through his father's side, the Da Vinci family. In 2021, researchers confirmed the existence of 14 living male relatives descended from Leonardo's half-brothers. They even identified his Y chromosome, a genetic marker passed unchanged through male lines, offering insights into his ancestry. These discoveries are not mere curiosities. They may one day help authenticate artworks and clarify mysteries surrounding his life. Even more intriguing is the study of his possible remains. Leonardo was buried in the church of Saint-Florentin in Amboise, France, but during the French Revolution, the church was destroyed, and the exact location of his bones was lost. In the 19th century, a set of remains believed to be his were reburied in the chapel of Saint-Hubert at the Château d'Amboise. Recent proposals to analyse DNA from these bones aim to confirm whether they belong to Leonardo. Such a study could also shed light on his health, his diet, and even the cause of his death, which remains somewhat uncertain. Historical accounts suggest he suffered a stroke, leaving his right hand paralysed in his final years, but other conditions have been speculated. The rediscovery of Leonardo's manuscripts in the modern era was like uncovering a time capsule. The Codex Atlanticus, preserved in the Biblioteca Ambrosiana in Milan, offers a sweeping view of his mind. The Codex Leicester, owned by Bill Gates, reveals his observations on water, light, and geology. Other codices, scattered across Europe, continue to surprise researchers. Every page confirms what Giorgio Vasari wrote in the 16th century: Leonardo was marvellous and divine. Leonardo's later life in France under King Francis I was quieter but still productive. The king adored him, calling him "my father," and gave him freedom to pursue his interests. At Clos-Lucé, Leonardo spent his final years surrounded by gardens, students, and his ever-present notebooks. He continued to design canals and architecture even as his health declined. On May 2nd, 1519, he died at the age of 67. Legend says the king held him as he passed, though this story is likely romanticized. Whether true or not, it reflects the reverence Leonardo inspired. His funeral was modest, and for centuries his grave was neglected. Yet his ideas lived on, carried in the work of those who followed, and later resurrected by scholars who recognized his brilliance. By the 19th century, he had become a symbol of human potential, celebrated as both artist and scientist. Today, his name stands for creativity itself. Modern technology has allowed us to experience Leonardo in new ways. Digital reconstructions bring his machines to life. High-resolution scans reveal hidden layers in his paintings. Augmented reality allows us to walk through his notebooks. These innovations do more than honour him, they continue his spirit of exploration. Even beyond academia, his influence is everywhere. Companies name products after him, schools bear his name, his drawings appear on currency, stamps, and countless reproductions. The Vitruvian Man alone has become a global symbol of humanism and science, and while some uses of his image are superficial, the fact that he remains relevant speaks volumes. Few figures from history have managed to remain both iconic and deeply meaningful. One particularly moving aspect of his legacy is how it bridges cultures. Leonardo belongs not only to Italy or to Europe, but to the world. His art hangs in French museums, his notebooks reside in British libraries, his ideas resonate in American research labs, and his influence spans continents. Wherever people value creativity, Leonardo's spirit is present. The continued fascination with Leonardo also sparks debates. Some scholars argue we romanticize him too much, turning him into a myth rather than a man. They remind us that he was not infallible. He made mistakes, abandoned projects, and sometimes pursued dead ends. But perhaps this makes him even more inspiring. His greatness didn't come from perfection. It came from persistence, from his willingness to ask questions others ignored. Genetic studies, archaeological investigations, and art analysis will no doubt keep uncovering new aspects of his life. Each discovery adds another thread to the tapestry of his legacy. Yet even if we learned everything about him, if every lost notebook were found, every painting authenticated, every bone confirmed, there would still be something elusive about Leonardo. Genius resists full explanation. Today, standing before one of his works, or leafing through reproductions of his notebooks, one can't help but feel a connection across time. Here was a man who lived 5 centuries ago, yet thought like a modern scientist, painted with unmatched sensitivity, and questioned the universe with a child's wonder. His life reminds us that the boundaries of what we know are always waiting to be pushed further. Leonardo's legacy is not just in the things he made, but in the questions he left us. Questions about nature, about humanity, about possibility. And as long as we keep asking them, as long as we keep exploring, he remains alive in our collective memory. He once wrote, "A life well spent is long." His own life, though it ended centuries ago, continues to unfold in the minds of those who study him. In that sense, Leonardo da Vinci's life is still being spent, and it is very, very long. Leonardo's life did not end with the closing of his eyes in 1519. His questions, his ways of seeing, his ideas, they survived, scattering across centuries, landing in the hands and minds of scientists, artists, and thinkers. To speak of Leonardo's legacy is to speak of a bridge, one that connects the Renaissance to our modern world and perhaps beyond. But beyond the technical brilliance, there is something more elusive. The philosophy that breathed through everything he did. He was not a philosopher in the formal sense. He didn't write treatises or argue in universities. Yet his notebooks are filled with reflections that feel like whispered meditations on life. Scattered among the diagrams and inventions are thoughts that reveal how he saw existence. Nature is the mistress of all masters, he wrote, emphasizing that the answers he sought were not in books, but in observation. For Leonardo, truth came from looking, really looking, at the world around him. A falling leaf, the curve of a river, the anatomy of a hand, each was a lesson waiting to be learned. His philosophy of learning was radical for its time. The church dominated knowledge in the 15th century, insisting on truths delivered from authority. Leonardo, by contrast, trusted his senses. He dissected bodies when it was forbidden. He questioned Aristotle's teachings, and he trusted his own experiments over ancient texts. This belief in evidence over tradition foreshadowed the scientific revolution that would come after him. Galileo, Newton, Darwin, they all walked paths that Leonardo had helped to clear, even if he didn't live to see where they led. He was also deeply reflective about time. He often wrote of its passing with a kind of melancholy. In one note he observed, "Time stays long enough for those who use it." He understood that life was short, even for someone who lived as fully as he did. Perhaps this awareness of time's fleeting nature is why he chased so many questions, why he refused to stay still. Each day was an opportunity to see more, to know more. In his later years, as his body slowed, his reflections became more personal. "While I thought I was learning how to live, I have been learning how to die," he wrote. These words are not morbid, they're serene. They suggest a man who accepted the impermanence of life and who found peace in the fact that his work, unfinished as it was, would outlive him. Modern thinkers have tried to define Leonardo. Was he an artist who dabbled in science, or a scientist who happened to paint? The truth is that he was both, and neither. He was a man who saw no separation between disciplines. To him, everything was connected. The geometry of a shell, the mechanics of a heart, the light falling on a face. He believed understanding came from seeing these connections, and he pursued them with relentless curiosity. This worldview resonates strongly today, in a time when specialization often fragments knowledge. Leonardo's approach reminds us of the value of interdisciplinary thinking, of blending science and art, logic and imagination. His life is a quiet argument against the limits we place on ourselves when we say, "I am only this," or "I cannot do that." He was not limited, and neither are we, if we allow ourselves to ask questions as he did. His influence reaches beyond the intellectual. There is something deeply human in his way of being, his empathy for animals, his fascination with nature, his humour. Yes, humour, because despite his serious genius, Leonardo enjoyed play. He drew caricatures, wrote riddles, and filled his notebooks with jokes alongside equations. He saw laughter as part of learning, as essential as study. This balance of seriousness and playfulness is part of what makes him so timeless. Even in technology, Leonardo's ghost lingers. Engineers today still build his machines, testing the limits of his designs. His flying machines, once dreams on paper, inspire drones and aircraft. His studies of anatomy echo in medical imaging. His understanding of fluid dynamics informs modern science. NASA has looked at his work on vortices to understand airflow around spacecraft. 5 centuries later, his ideas still work. But perhaps his deepest resonance lies in his humanism. Leonardo placed humans at the center of his vision, not as rulers over nature, but as part of it. His Vitruvian Man is not a boast of human superiority. It's a reminder of our place in the universe, balanced between the earthly square and the infinite circle. In an age where technology sometimes makes us feel detached from nature, Leonardo's vision invites us back to that harmony. Today, people around the world travel to see his art, read his notes, and walk in the places where he lived. At Clos Lucé, his final home, replicas of his inventions stand in the gardens, and visitors can touch them, spin gears, and see his ideas move. Children laugh as they play with these machines, not realizing they are interacting with history. In moments like this, Leonardo's spirit feels present. He wanted his ideas to live, and they do, not in museums alone, but in the minds of those who keep asking questions. There's something almost poetic about the fact that so much of Leonardo's work remains unfinished. The bronze horse never cast, the murals lost, the notebooks incomplete. Some might see this as failure, but perhaps it's fitting. His life was a conversation with the unknown, and conversations don't end neatly. They continue. The missing pieces invite us to wonder, to imagine what might have been, and that's exactly what Leonardo wanted us to do, to wonder. In our modern world, obsessed with speed and completion, Leonardo offers a counterexample. He shows that it's okay to take time, to explore slowly, to follow curiosity wherever it leads. The value lies not only in what we finish, but in how we search. Standing in front of the Mona Lisa today, amid the crowd of phones and cameras, it's easy to forget the quiet in which it was created. Leonardo painted it slowly, lovingly, over years. Every layer of glaze was a meditation. When we look into her eyes, we are not just looking at a woman, we are looking into the soul of the man who painted her, the soul of someone who believed there was always more to see. In the end, Leonardo's resonance is not just historical, it's personal. He speaks to the part of us that is curious, that asks why the sky is blue, why birds fly, why hearts beat. He reminds us that we too can look closely, think deeply, and connect things that seem separate. In this way, he is not only a figure of the past, but a companion in our own search for meaning. More than 500 years later, we still stand in the shadow of his questions and in the light of his discoveries. He continues to inspire not because he was perfect, but because he was human. A human who dared to see the world as a mystery to be unravelled. And so, as this journey through his life comes to a close, we might pause to reflect on what Leonardo has left us. Not just paintings and machines, but a way of seeing, a way of thinking. He taught us that everything connects, that curiosity is endless, and that beauty lies not just in answers, but in the pursuit of them. Perhaps that is why, when we think of Leonardo da Vinci, we don't just remember what he did. We remember what he makes us feel. Wonder. And as long as there is wonder, Leonardo lives on. And now we reach the quiet end of this journey. Through the hills of Vinci, the bustling workshops of Florence, the courts of Milan, and the gardens of France, we've followed the footsteps of a man who never stopped looking deeper. Leonardo da Vinci left the world centuries ago, yet his questions still breathe among us. He reminds us that knowledge is not a destination, but a path, winding and endless, filled with wonder. That art and science are not opposites, but partners, each illuminating the other. And that curiosity, simple, relentless curiosity, is one of the most human things we can hold. As you rest now, let his story stay with you. Close your eyes, and perhaps imagine the faint scratching of a quill on paper, the hum of thoughts turning into sketches, the soft smile of a painting that still looks back at you. The night is long, and there is time to dream.